If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, well, aging.
Hey Jeff, have you noticed that we live in a really hectic world?
No kidding.
Yeah, I just feel like lately everyone around me is just super on edge right now. And I don't know if it's from the holiday spirit, of just the financial burden of that extra stress, or maybe it's, the COVID-19 pandemic. Maybe it is a full moon. I don't know, but it got me thinking. Every single person, doesn't matter if you're young or if you're elderly, you're going to deal with stress at some point in time, right? And if we're going to do a podcast about aging well, part of that has to do with monitoring our stress. So I thought that would be a good subject to kind of talk about. But before we talk about it, I guess, what is stress? Well, if you look up the National Institute of Mental Health, their definition of stress is a physical or mental response to an external cause, such as having a lot of homework or having an illness. A stressor may be a one-time or short-time term occurrence, or it happens repeatedly over a long period of time. Anxiety, on the other hand, anxiety is your body's reaction to stress and can occur even if there is no current threat. If the anxiety doesn't go away and it begins to interfere with your life, it could do effects on your health. You could experience problems with sleeping or with immune, digestive, cardiovascular, and reproductive system. You also may be at a high risk of developing a mental illness such as anxiety disorder or depression, etc., etc., etc. Long story short, stress can be absolutely terrible, but we know ways that can combat it. With your experience of being an exercise physiologist, what are some ways that people can easily combat stress?
Well, to combat stress, the main way to combat stress is to avoid it. And we can't avoid it, so we have to deal with it. So to deal with it, you can see a therapist. You can exercise. You can have a healthy diet that's going to help you manage it a little bit more effectively. Meditation is another great, effective way of doing it.
So you mentioned exercise. What are the exercises that can relieve the most amount of stress possible?
I don't know that there is any specific exercises that are going to eliminate the effects of stress. Remember, you can't eliminate stress. So you have to deal with it. And exercise is just one of the many ways that we can deal with it. So obviously all forms of exercise are going to contribute to that combating of the stress reflex. Now remember that stress is really just the fight or flight response. Mm-hmm. Our bodies are made to be able to respond to stress. And so when you are exposed to something that is stressful, or something that is life-threatening. But the problem with stress is that we become so overloaded with it that our bodies aren't capable of responding to it, or we're getting hammered with that fight or flight response so much that it becomes more of a natural state in our bodies. And so the idea is to have the adaptation response that's going to improve that fight or flight response.
Like homeostasis?
It's not homeostasis per se. I mean, homeostasis is the balance within the body. And so, in a sense, when we are under a constant bombardment of stress, we are just simply elevating our homeostasis to a maintenance of all the stress hormones and everything to a much higher level. Now, when we more meticulously apply stress to our body through exercise or, just regular habits that challenge the body, then the body makes, specific adaptations to impose demands. So if the fight or flight response requires an elevation of your epinephrine, norepinephrine, it requires an increased sympathetic response. It requires these changes in the body to elevate your heart rate, to send blood flow to the skeletal muscles. All the things that we find ourselves doing. We start breathing a little bit faster, preparing for that activity. The body is going to adapt to that by making the response smaller, or the necessary response smaller. So if I'm walking down a dark alley and I hear footsteps behind me, I'm going to get that fight or flight response. I told the story before about being in an area that was unfamiliar to me, and it was early in the morning walking to a conference, and I hear somebody running up behind me, and I immediately had that fight or flight response. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw a guy about half my size just running, carrying a couple grocery bags. And it was kind of embarrassing. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe I, got tensed up over that. But I use it as an example in my classes because had I not been in better shape, if that was like the maximum response for my body because I'm out of shape and I'm repeatedly under stress that I can't handle, and I turn around and it's Dwayne Johnson wielding a knife at me.
Oh, man.
Not that he would wield a knife at me, I would hope, but, it's just some big, massive character coming at me. My response has to be further elevated. So our body responds by being more equipped to deal with that stress. So a small increase in epinephrine, norepinephrine, my heart rate has the capacity to increase further because I already have a lower maintained resting heart rate. If I have a high heart rate, my heart rate is consistently high, then I have less capacity to elevate that. And, we talk in PhysicX about the intrinsic heart rhythm, and it's at about 100 beats per minute. And with that intrinsic rhythm, if the heart is not getting any kind of impulse from either the sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system, our heart rate would be somewhere in that range. But the parasympathetic nervous system pulls that heart rate down, causing us to have to do less work with the heart. The heart's not beating as fast, and it allows us that greater capacity to increase to our maximum heart rate. Sympathetic kicks in at roughly 100 beats per minute, and that's what elevates our heart rate. So there's this kind of constant tug of war between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. Well, the parasympathetic is what's preparing us for giving us kind of a more restive state. And there's been some research out there that I just kind of came across this past week looking at the effects of resting heart rate on dementia and cognitive ability as we age.
Wow.
And actually finding that the higher your resting heart rate, the greater your risk of dementia. And it's correlative data, but it's interesting to think about the fact that if we are under these high stress environments, which is going to give us a higher heart rate, we're not exercising, doing things that are going to bring that kind of restive state down, we're at greater risk of more of these stress-related health issues. And there are many ways that we can increase our parasympathetic stimulation. in my interview with John McGuire, he brought up the vagus nerve and vagus nerve stimulation through relaxive, meditative methods. And Quake Cooper brought up meditation as well. When we meditate, when we relax ourselves, brings us into a more relaxed state, we are training that system to come down to a calmer level, which means that we have a greater capacity to increase when the stress does arise.
Again, back to the National Institute of Mental Health. What they talk about is stress, which is that external portion. Stress can actually go away. Once you remove yourself from a stressful situation, the stress is gone, but it's the anxiety portion. And the anxiety, it usually involves a persistent feeling of apprehension or dread, and that really doesn't go away. And the reason why I kind of want to talk about that is we can easily say that, oh, it's really simple, just get out of a stressful situation. But if you notice, there's more and more people in our society today they're becoming diagnosed with anxiety disorder, right? Meaning they're not able to internally let that stress go. And more people are dealing with that. And if they're constantly dealing with that, some of the side effects of stress on the body, the long-term effects, it can be as simple as a headache or heartburn, but it can go into a lot more hazardous things such as heart attacks, liver failure, high blood pressure, sugar levels. I really think that monitoring our stress levels, whether it's, like you said, either meditating or exercise or anything, I think if we can grasp the concept of, okay, I'm out of this situation, but I'm still feeling worked up. I'm still feeling that. If we can figure out a way to take that stress and kind of mold it into something better, you can either be a victim of stress and just say, oh, I can't do it. I'm too scared. I have bad anxiety. Or you can learn to deal with it. Okay, research all aside, I kind of want to open up and be a little bit vulnerable for a moment. The whole point of me wanting to talk about anxiety and stress is because me personally, I actually suffer from really, really bad anxiety to the point where my body will hit such a huge fight or flight stage that it almost feels crippling. But it doesn't have to be, right? And I know a lot of people around the world, they are all, at some point in time, they're going to have stress or have a panic attack or have anxiety. It is part of life, but it's how we deal with it, right? I know that a lot of doctors out there are just saying, oh, you're anxious, here's a pill, right? I don't think for every single person that is the best way to do it, especially if their anxiety becomes so bad that they say, oh, I can't even be around my own family right now. My anxiety is too high. If you're to a point where you can't go to work or you can't go to school or you can't interact with your own family, that to me is a problem. And that is the portion where anxiety or stress has such a tight grip over your life and your body that you become not functional. And if for our listeners for this episode, I just want to figure out a way for them to combat that.
I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging. Well, again, we go back to the avoidance piece is the best way to minimize the stress on the body. Yeah, there's certainly healthy stresses that create an appropriate physiological response. We talk about exercise, and that is a stressor, and but it's a good stress. It's a stress that stimulates the autonomic nervous system appropriately. It affects the endocrine system. It affects the cardiorespiratory system. I mean, it's going to help us deal with the stress more appropriately. But any condition that we are dealing with has to be considered as both behavioral, physiological, and sociological. And when we're dealing with stress, you can't ignore all those components in there. You have to consider that, you mentioned a physician just giving prescribing a drug. Well, in some cases, obviously, when there is a physiological imbalance in the body that might be exacerbating depression or anxiety and those types of things, and certainly medication is going to be warranted.
Correct.
But if that's all a doctor is doing, then you need to get the hell away from that doctor, because that's a shitty doctor. And now I have to check that little box of explicitness in, when we upload these podcasts. But, I'm going to, call a spade a spade. A doctor that just immediately goes to prescribing medication without considering the ties between the behavior, the society, and the physiology, they're doing a disservice not only to that individual but to society. And that's not good medical practice. I think there is an underutilization of therapy in our society. I mean, I think almost all of us could probably benefit from a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And I would encourage anybody who is having extreme anxiety, depression, and just any kind of issue that is not helping them be emotionally well, should consider therapy. I mean, there should not be the social stigma that we have with therapy. The downside of it all, and we're having kind of this own experience in our family as we try and kind of help my daughter with her anxiety issues. There aren't therapists to be found, and COVID has done more damage. Not the virus itself, but the response to the virus has done more damage to our society than the virus. We have socially isolated, we have closed schools, we have told kids to stay away from their friends, to put masks on their face and not be able to see people's expressions. I feel weird going out and in public, and I know I'm fine with wearing a mask to protect people, but I feel this awkwardness when I'm talking with people, and it's like, you can't tell it, but I'm smiling right now. I hope you know that I'm kind of laughing at your joke. What I just said was intended to be humorous, not taken the wrong way. But when we can't see people's expressions and emotions, it really negatively impacts
It messes with you psychologically. And then also to isolate people and to separate them and maintain that social distancing. A lot of people still crave that social interaction, and they're going to go on social media. They're going to go on there. And social media has been scientifically proven to cause more stress, more anxiety, because they're only seeing the good, right? They're only seeing, oh man, this person just did this craft. I wish I could do it, or they look at the photos like, oh man, how did they get enough money to go on this trip during the COVID thing, even though I lost my job, and it's just comparing and contrasting, comparing and contrasting. And I think recognizing that our bodies are feeling that way, or recognizing that you, by staring at something, are getting yourself worked up. I think if we can recognize it and we can remove ourselves from that level of stress, excellent.
You brought up social distancing. I think that in itself, the terminology has done damage. Now, when we published an article beyond COVID-19, preparing for the next pandemic, that was intended to talk about the considerations in gyms and fitness centers to keep them open in light in the necessity of these gyms being open. And in the review, the reviewers for the paper had me go back and change it. They preferred physical distancing over social distancing. And I hadn't given it much thought, but the more time has gone on, it's like, physical distancing, social distancing, what's the difference? But, there's a big difference. When you start saying social distancing, we're telling people to stay away from people and that interactions are a harmful thing. And the reality is, and this is any, kind of contagion, there's a need to physically distance yourself from somebody. And most of the literature will say that about 3 feet is sufficient to protect yourself from the spread of most of these airborne viruses, and 6 feet just gives you that added comfort. It's not a scientific number per se. I mean, what they find is that the further the distance you are away physically, the more protected you are. And so it's a gradation. It's not like suddenly you get at 6 feet, you're protected, but if you're 5'11", you're going to get the virus. It's a means of protecting us physically. And so when we talk about physical distancing, I think that has a better connotation to it, that, just keep your distance so that you don't get somebody else sick or you don't get sick. But when we talk about social distancing, I think there's a place to say, yes, we need social distancing in this pandemic, but that social distancing needs to be get the hell away from Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all these things that really beyond the current virus itself, we need to get away from. We need to socially distance ourselves from social media, but that doesn't mean that we socially distance ourselves from other people. I think we need more social interaction, but it needs to be the more appropriate social interaction. And when we are in a state of anxiety, depression, we tend to push people away, and that's what causes even further alienation and separation and harm to us physically and psychologically. And so we need to focus on maybe being more aware of other individuals in a social setting. So when you notice that somebody is a little off, that they're not themselves, that they seem to be distancing themselves, or they seem depressed. We had that school shooting in Michigan recently, and that kid did everything possible to cry out to everybody that I'm messed up, I need help. And the right people, the teachers, I think they made the effort, but they could have definitely made a better effort in terms of not just calling the mom and saying, hey, we got this, we caught your son Googling buying ammunition. They should have sensed that this has gone beyond just the normal psychological way of dealing with anxiety. I mean, many of us, we all want to shoot something up at some point in our lives. But we don't act on it, right? We know that it's just a way of dealing with our social anxiety or our inner angst or whatever it might be. But when somebody gets to the point where they are actually planning to do what is going on in their head, they've crossed that line to where they really, really need help. And somebody should have called 911 on that kid. And, the parents, in my opinion, are very much responsible for that, because the clues were there and they encouraged it rather than discouraged it. They did nothing to help that poor child. And, I think we will tend to attack these shooters and these kids that, just act out in these ways. And we don't realize that there are a lot of circumstances that led up to that. And in many ways, society has failed them. And, we've done that as well, each individually. I mean, we've all bullied, we've all been bullied, but we need to recognize where people are hurting and intervene and do stuff to help. Kind of getting off the stressor piece, but I think it's not necessarily off. It's, when you look at somebody who is under a great deal of stress, we need to recognize that, because the individual themselves are probably under too much of a burden to actually do something themselves. And so what we can do to help them, I said everybody could probably benefit from a therapist. Likewise, the next best thing to a therapist is a friend. A friend that's going to be honest with you, not just one that's going to, woe is you, and just kind of allow you to kind of wallow in your anxiety or your self-pity or whatever it might be, but somebody that's going to help you help yourself and help get you back to that point of where you're, able to better manage your stress, if that's making any sense.
Now, you mentioned people, if they have the means to seek help, see a psychologist, psychiatrist. I agree 100%. I think if you guys have the ability to go out and better yourselves, it is not a weakness to do that. Go out and do that. With that also being said, there are certain things that psychiatrists may say, well, they told me that they had thoughts of suicide, or they had thoughts of this, but they never planned it out. They just said, I have thoughts. And there's a difference between, I have thoughts of this stress makes me feel this way, versus the stress has gotten so bad, I have now planned things out. I don't necessarily know if that's a societal way. How can we jump in? Where's the line for us to make that call? Is it time for us to jump in and help this person if they're feeling thoughts, or do we wait until they've yep, I've planned it all out, I've done this? Where is that line for us? If we're going to be that good friend that you talked about, where's the line? At what point do we jump in and say, hey bud, I don't want to see you like this anymore. It hurts me watching you hurt so much.
I don't think there's any question we jump in right away. I mean, that's what being a friend is.
Right.
It's when you start seeing those thoughts of depression, anxiety, of doing harm to somebody manifesting themselves in a plan. And I'm, again, not a psychologist. I don't have all the terminology in here, but I just recently listened to an interview between doctors Rachel Zoffness and Zubin Damania, and I'll leave a link to their interview. And they basically talk about this progression, and that, again, we all have these thoughts, but when they manifest themselves in planning, then that's when it's beyond just, I can help this person. I need to protect the rest of society. And, so from a therapist standpoint, they're letting you kind of express, helping you to kind of deal with those emotions. But once you kind of get to that point where, whoa, I've done everything I can, and this isn't working. This person is already planning. I know for a fact they've gone out and they've gotten a gun, or, they are starting now to plan this stuff. There's got to be more interaction there.
Right.
If the kid in Michigan, if his parents would have done more than just don't get caught, Googling finding bullets in class, or, just kind of dismiss the fact that he's drawing pictures of people bloodied and killed. If they had taken the step to get him help, there'd be lives saved, and it's a matter of catching the person before they do harm to themselves or somebody else, and dealing with it, and might be having him institutionalized for a while to get that all dealt with. But you can save a person and save many people. If you're ignoring friends who are having suicidal thoughts and things like that, you've got to be dealing with it in a positive manner, encouraging them, doing what you can do. But when you start to recognize that, okay, they're planning, they've bought the pills or they've bought the gun to kill themselves, you gotta call the authorities.
Right.
You're not protecting that person by ignoring it. And again, that's off the stress topic, but I would go back to, get it. We need to recognize when we need help, and we need to recognize when other people need help.
Right.
And as a society, we need to encourage therapy and make it, a welcome thing, that there's no stigma attached to it.
None.
And we need to have access. I mean, it was COVID, and especially since, so many therapists were doing everything through Zoom meetings and stuff. Well, a lot of people don't feel comfortable talking with somebody over the internet, in front of a camera. But they just weren't accessible. There is an extreme shortage of therapists right now, and people need them and they can't get it. And it scares me what can happen over the next couple of years in result of these, just the way we've dealt with COVID, and that we have elevated fear and anxiety in our society. It's gonna take years to recover from this.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned something about making therapy available, and therapy does cost money. And a lot of people, even with their jobs, they don't necessarily have the resources or the benefits. If you are fortunate enough to have a job that provides benefits, look into your benefits to see if they offer a therapy package. Here in Oregon, for a lot of individuals that may not have benefits, there's actually what's called an EAP program, and you are allowed 10 free sessions on your own. You just have to sign that up. You can go online. You can look through that. That's one of the state benefits here in Oregon. If that is not offered in your state, you can actually maybe go to your local church. A lot of churches will give you a counselor for free, where you can open up and you can vent and just get a lot of things out. As far as social media goes, although social media kind of walks that line of, that level of stress, you can actually reach out with social media. There's a lot of groups that are out there. Maybe get involved in a knitting or a cooking group. We are going to focus on exercise and health, so we're definitely going to promote, a recreational sport or something to that effect. But reach out. Do whatever you got to do to better yourself and help relieve that stress. I would say if you go through the process of reaching out, and whether it's a counselor or balancing your stress and your work life, whatever it is that you're trying to do to make it to where your anxiety does not become so overwhelming that it's crippling, and you have the mental awareness that, hey, I'm feeling stress, but I'm not going to let it consume me. I'm actually going to use it and harness it to my abilities. There's a wonderful study that's out there, and it's done by a PhD doctorate in psychology by the name of Dr. Timothy Legg, and he really goes into talking about the difference between good stress and bad stress. He says if you have the ability to harness that stress, it can actually improve your cognitive function. It improves your ability to be aware. In his study, he talks about people that have learned to deal with their stress. They're able to be hyper focused, almost like their memory is just on full blast. So if they're at work or they're at a really stressful scenario, maybe it's a construction site, they have to be aware of their surroundings. Unlike a normal person who may just have a desk job where they're like, where did I put that stapler? In that high stress scenario, it's I put it in the closet on Tuesday over there when I was getting the paper or making copies or whatever the case may be. When you're in that high stress, your cognitive thinking becomes a lot better. You're able to function, or you're able to process your thoughts a lot faster. You're able to hit deadlines. It makes you just fully aware of everything. So there is a way for us to take our stress levels and kind of turn it into a benefit.
It kind of goes back to, the dynamic systems model that we talked about in the major, where you have individuals who, you have the three components. You have the individual, the environment, and the task. And that individuals will all respond differently to the task that's at hand. So when you're dealing with stress is very different for that individual. So what is stress for one is not necessarily stress for another. So for a quarterback, if it's a game that is, it's not really important, maybe it's an exhibition game and their job's not on the line, they have less stress. They may underperform or they may overperform, or they may collapse under the lack of pressure. Whereas they're in a Super Bowl situation, some quarterbacks are going to do phenomenally, and others are going to choke. It's different from individuals. So they all respond. It's the environment. It's the interaction with that environment, that individual, their characteristics, and what is the task at hand. We're all interacting differently within those three dimensions, and where stress comes in, obviously the task is the stressor, so what is being demanded of us psychologically, physiologically, behaviorally, whatever, that is kind of the stressor. But where it becomes what we typically label as stress is where we're incapable of dealing with that. And so it causes us to underperform in light of that stressor. And for individuals who are under stress, in a single task, that stress may or may not improve performance. It may, some people, as a professor, I always hear students, well, I always write my best papers when, I wait till the last minute, which is BS, but
yes, it is.
But, or some people say, when I have a lot of tasks to do, I perform better because they can focus on each to get it done. But for other individuals, the more tasks you pile on them, the more they're just going to wig out. Mm. And so everybody's a little bit different, but where those stressors lead to an unhealthy stress or anxiety and things like that is where it's just stressor on top of stressor, and we're not able to recover from that fight or flight response. Each individual stressor creates a little bit of that fight or flight. But if you have numerous stressors or repeated, stimuli of the same stress, then we never recover from those changes. You think of epinephrine being released in response to, it's in fight or flight response. Well, if the epinephrine gets elevated, and before we can recover from that stress, there's another stress, then it gets worse and worse and worse. Think of, if you've ever gone to like a really good haunted house at Halloween, right? And you're being repeatedly scared, and it's dark, and there's all those things. By the time you get out of there, you're exhausted sometimes, because you have repeatedly had to deal with that stress. Now, the fortunate thing about that is you walk away, within minutes you're laughing about it. You can, you go relax, you sleep, and, that stress all goes away. But it's when you're having, you have a family member in a hospital, you have a family member recently died, your job is on the line, your bills are stacking up, the bills are due in a couple days, and you have no idea how those are going to be paid. You have your significant other putting pressure on you because of the lack of money and the other issues. Your kids need all of that stuff. And then you go to bed and you're just laying in bed, just like all of that stuff attacking you. You never get a reprise from that stress. That's when we start seeing these adverse physiological effects of the stress. But where we can deal with it, where we have opportunity to consciously compartmentalize some of that stress, maybe, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to spend an hour today going through the finances, I'm going to spend another hour of the day kind of dealing with scheduling for the next week. And those types of activities can help to minimize some of the effects of that stress. And that's where, journaling comes into play, meditation comes into play, taking that time to exercise, having social outlets, perhaps seeing a therapist, getting a regular diet so that you're not having some of those issues that come with spikes in insulin or dips in blood glucose levels, and those types of things.
So in his article that he wrote of the individuals that were able to be aware of their stress and kind of harness it, he talks about it that they were able to properly exercise mindfulness, meaning they were able to recognize, man, I'm starting to get stressed out. But they were able to, like you said, compartmentalize. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But what he talks about is that anxiety and depression are both involving symptoms of just that reminiscing. Like, oh man, I'm constantly thinking about all these external factors. But the mindfulness, specifically targeting those particular system, was allowing the people to become more present, more in the moment, breathing, feeling the air around them, being in tune with all 5 of their senses. And then once they were able to do that, then they were able to compartmentalize exactly what you were saying and decipher the difference between the events that were around them. Was it important or was it not important? And if it was either important or not important, was it in their control or was it out of their control? And through that, as the article kept going on, instead of having people just focus on the stress to cause more stress, just being aware of everything that was around them and having that mindfulness, they were able to kind of convince themselves to not only be mindful, but self-compassionate. So self-kindness versus self-judgment, for example, right? Being kind and understanding towards oneself rather than being so self-critical. We can take those baby steps and just slowly transition. Hey, you know what? I'm feeling stressed. Why am I stressed out? Well, I'm stressed out because I have these deadlines that I have to hit at work. Okay. Is it in my control? Yeah, it is. Perfect. What can I do to relieve this? Well, I'm going to set a designated time frame up. I'm going to have control. I'm going to post something up on my door to say, do not bug me. I'm setting this time frame. I'm going to have no distractions. I'm going to be aware. I'm going to be present. And it seems really simple. It seems like, well, duh. But again, talking on behalf of someone that experiences anxiety, when that stress level gets so high, it's really hard to bounce back from. It truly does feel crippling. But if I'm able to harness it and I'm able to use it as a tool to say, okay, breathe, be here, be in the moment. I have to hit this deadline. I will hit that deadline. You know, my competitive side will come out and I'm going to give it my all. And that works for me. I know it doesn't work for a lot of other people.
You know, we want to avoid feeling super, super stressed.
Correct.
So if we're having to wait until we get to the point where I'm feeling super, super stressed, we've let the cat out of the bag. We've
Right.
gone too far. We need to recognize I'm in a stressful situation, or this is going to be a stressful situation. What do I have to do? And so what do you do on the front end to kind of prevent yourself from getting into that position where you're saying, I'm super, super stressed and I got to do something to get out of it?
Well, as far as it goes as like a work environment, right when I get to work, I look at my to-do list because before I leave work, I'll write myself a to-do list at the end of the day, and then I'll revisit it first thing in the morning, and I'll look at it, and I'll look at the items that need to take priority. This is a priority. I have to get this done by this time frame. And then I just kind of slowly will check off the other items. And if I don't get to the less important items, well, then it becomes a priority the next day to get those done. And that kind of helps me stay in control. It's been kind of bad with the whole COVID pandemic, right? We talked about how that has made people kind of stressed and wanting self-acceptance or wanting to feel good. So nutrition definitely comes into a huge factor with that. I noticed with me, if I start eating a lot more vegetables and just get rid of all the crap, no fast food or anything like that, my stress levels go down dramatically. And then just for my own physical health, I love lifting heavy. I really do. Just squatting, deadlifts. I know there's a lot of science behind it as far as increasing the proper hormones to help balance the stress, as well as the impact that it has on your entire nervous system. But yeah, the release of all of the physical stress that I will have during the day will literally all go away as soon as I just lift heavy and hard and go in with the mindset of having that PR. I also have a really good support system. Like, I'm really, really fortunate enough to have an excellent support system. Like, I can talk to you if I'd like. If I can talk to my friends. My girlfriend is amazing. But these are things that I help. Another thing, as far as my supplements go, I take vitamin D every single day. I truly love it. When I was diagnosed with anxiety, my doctors prescribed me lorazepam, and I did not like what it did to me. I could not think. I became almost like a zombie, and I didn't want to do that anymore. So I did my own research. So for me, supplement wise, I'll take D3, probably about 2,000 IUBs of that, and then I will take ashwagandha and 5-HTP just first thing in the morning, and that has definitely helped with my stress and anxiety. Traumatic, but that's just what I do. That's for me.
There's quite a few things that I do, and one thing that as you were talking about prioritizing and making your to-do list, I think there's a couple things to consider as we look at those to-do lists. Sometimes if we, and it didn't sound like you were doing this, but sometimes when we do those to-do lists at the end of the day, we're kind of leaving work with this, all that I have to do tomorrow. And for many people that can carry into our night, cause, more restless sleep or lack of sleep and those types of things. And it may actually contribute to the stress. One thing I always liked was, I believe it was Stephen Covey, that he kind of created a quadrant. And, there's another individual, and maybe I can kind of insert that in here at some point. I'm trying to recall his exact, because he put a twist on the quadrant, but it was a quadrant of importance versus urgencies. And so you had things that are very important or not important. You had things that were urgent and not urgent. And the goal is to do the things that are most urgent and most important, and put the things that are certainly, less urgent, less important to the end, but also to not focus in on the things that are urgent and unimportant. There's always, especially in a work situation, somebody's always coming to you with an issue that needs to be taken care of. As a professor, I see this all the time. Students coming to me with, their urgent issues, and, sometimes I just have to think, your lack of preparation is not my problem.
Right.
But, when we prioritize things appropriately, then first of all, we don't end the day with all this list of stuff that has to be done. Unless it's stuff that, comes up at the end of the day, this is urgent, it has to be done first thing tomorrow morning. Good. That getting it done tonight is not a big issue. So that doesn't cause you stress. But if we think about it throughout the night, we're just contributing to our stress. And so kind of having that right balance of priorities and urgencies, I think, is important to managing our stress levels.
So for me, it's the exact opposite. If I don't write it down, then I do carry it over, right? But if I write it down, okay, I'm going to do this tomorrow, this tomorrow, this tomorrow, this tomorrow, and as soon as I leave, boom, I already wrote it down. I know what I have to do. I don't have to think about it. It's not going to carry forward. But if I don't write it down before I leave, oh man, okay, I got to remember to do this. I also got to remember to do that, right? But if I write it down, okay, this is your chore list, and I'm writing a note for my future self.
Yeah.
And then once I write it down, I don't think about it.
Yeah, you're not carrying it into the evening. You are putting it on your list of tasks to do tomorrow.
Correct.
And so it's not anything to worry about today or tonight, so you can leave work, lock up, go, and not have to worry about anything until you walk in the next morning. That's the healthy approach to doing it all, and I think incorporating the many activities into the day that can help to, again, increase the parasympathetic stimulation, having that meditation, get the vagus nerve stimulated, lower your resting heart rate, exercising regularly. I look at exercise. I hate exercise. I always tell this to people that, you'd think as an exercise physiologist, I love exercising. That's what I want to do all day. It's like, no, it's not what I want to do all day. I hate exercise with a passion. I don't enjoy it. But the reason I don't enjoy it is because I go at it hard. And I always use the analogy of the person hitting himself in the forehead with a 2x4. And you ask them, well, why are you doing that? It's because it feels so good when I stop. So I know that what I'm doing is carrying over and kind of making me healthier, making me feel better throughout the other, 22, 23 hours in the day that, I wouldn't have if I didn't exercise regularly. And journaling helps as well. Again, just kind of getting those thoughts out there. Another thing I like to do is, and it comes from the Hebrew word haval. Haval is translated in the Bible in like Ecclesiastics as meaningless. Where if you read in the beginning of Ecclesiastics, everything is meaningless. They don't mean that everything is really meaningless. It really actually means more of everything is like a mist. It's going to dissipate. It's going to go away. So it's really a focus on living in the moment and not letting things build and continue and to kind of grow on you.
You mentioned exercise, how you hate exercise, but exercise could actually be considered a positive form of stress if you think about it, specifically resistance training, right? We go in the realm that you're having an external stress on the muscle and it will adapt itself and it will grow, become stronger, bigger, have more endurance, right? So I guess one of the things that I just wanted to kind of take away is, although stress is, we can go into all the negative side effects, insomnia, anxiety, depression, liver enzymes, high blood pressure, heart attacks, strokes. Stress can be super, super dangerous. But there are certain positive things that we can benefit from certain types of stress. Not too much, but just a little bit of it.
You're talking acute versus chronic stress.
Correct.
And there are stressors that are positive stresses, things that stimulate an overload, the overload principle in exercise, and that promotes an adaptive response. Chronic stress or negative stress creates a negative response in the body. It tends to overload the physiology. It creates more psychosocial challenges that allow us not to adapt. There's just stressors that we cannot adapt to or do not adapt well to. But a little bit of stress, even, fearful stress is healthy for us because it allows us to learn to adapt to it. But, when you talk about stress, you have to really talk in terms of acute versus chronic stress and, more beneficial stress as opposed to adverse stress. But even, exercise can become a adverse chronic stress. If you are over exercising, which I would argue most people don't, I think the biggest problem in exercise is probably underloading as opposed to overloading or overtraining. But, with athletes in particular that are training intensely, collegiate athletes, you have the training, response, or, the training that they're doing, the practicing that they have, school, social anxieties, a lack of sleep because they're up studying. Most don't get enough nutrition. Those all contribute to a chronic overload of the system that leads to overtraining, that leads to some of the same symptoms that chronic stress will have in an individual who's more sedentary. So there are ways of overdoing the positive stresses in our lives as well. We need balance, and this is where I think the well-centered fitness comes in, having not only a focus on the physical, but also on the spiritual, the emotional, the intellectual, and the social. Having those all in a proper balance will enable us to better manage the stresses that are going to come upon us.
I remember taking sports psychology, and we did this awesome experiment where we took a piece of string and we held it out, and there was like a little tiny, like a nut, like a washer on the other end, and we were not supposed to twirl that string at all. We just had to stare at it and just think, okay, have it rotate right, and just focus. And eventually our neurotransmitters, just by holding it out there, even though we were not moving it, that rope would slowly kind of rotate on its own. And then we were asked to, okay, don't have it turn to the right, have it rotate counterclockwise, right? Have it rotate to the left. And eventually it ended up doing that. And the whole point of that sports psychology for that lesson was to say that whatever we're thinking, whatever we're obsessing about, whatever we're mentally having, our body is going to have 1/3 of an effect on that. So if we are like, oh no, I'm stressed, I'm freaked out, oh, I got to calm my heart rate down. Well, the body's going to react even more. But if we could be in that moment and just, I'm stressed, it's okay, I'm going to make it through this, and truly believe in our hearts, I'm going to make it through this. I'm going to control my breathing. I'm going to lower my heart rate down. That's been scientifically proven to help out. Exercise has been scientifically proven out. We talked about going out and seeking counseling. If we're unable to do this, counseling is great. What do you feel about adding supplements to help relieving stress, right? I mentioned earlier about vitamin D, and that's something that helps me. It's also been scientifically proven to help relieve or at least reduce stress. What do you feel about supplements?
Okay. First, I'm going to challenge the word proven. I don't like the term proven because as any science that we do, I learned this in graduate school that, as scientists, we deal with probabilities. So when a study is done, you always see most people ignore this because they don't know what it means, but the little p-value, the little p less than some number tells us the probability of something being the result of the interaction or just simply the result of chance. And so we're looking for, really small amount of that response being due to just simply chance. And the smaller that is, the more likely we are looking at truth. But the reality is that we're never 100% true. So when it comes to supplements, usually the big red flag for me is when I see the phrase clinically proven, because that usually lights up my bullshit monitor. It's like, no, it's not proven. Especially, when it's coming from the supplement company. So I'm very, very cautious about that, particularly, and I would want, anybody listening to this to, evaluate the products that they buy based on the science that is out there. I mean, you mentioned vitamin D, and I do agree that there is strong likelihood of, big benefits in many cases. I mean, in COVID, there were several studies that I read that it minimized some of the risks of severe infection. Does it mean that if I start taking a vitamin D supplementation, I will not? Because that's what proven would be, that that there's a 100% chance that I'm not going to have it. It's not very likely.
Right.
And so when we look at supplements, you have to consider what supplements are we considering. If it's a nutritional supplement, there's probably not any harm in taking it. But the first question I would ask is, why do you need to supplement it? Now, vitamin D, you may not be consuming enough foods that have vitamin D in it. We live in Oregon, which is cloudy quite a bit of the time, and so you're not getting out in the sun, or maybe because of your work, you're not outside much at all and you're not getting that vitamin D from the sun. That's probably a supplement. Is it causing harm to do it? Probably not. There are a lot of, vitamin C, same thing. I mean, zinc. Those are all known to have a positive effect on the immune system. And so is there harm in taking those? No, there's not going to be any harm in taking many nutritional supplements. Taking a daily multivitamin is not a bad idea. But I would argue that probably in most cases, the cost of that multivitamin or some of those vitamin supplementations, if we are eating a healthy diet, is going down the toilet. But if you can afford it and it's not causing you harm and you feel a benefit to it, then by all means do it. Now, when we start getting into some of the many other supplements that are out there, I have very little confidence in most supplements that are out there, particularly those that are marketed towards the exercise realm.
Well, yeah.
There's very few that have an extensive amount of research behind them. From that standpoint, I mean, probably the one that has the most research behind it and seems to have the most positive effect and least amount of negative effect is going to be creatine supplementation.
I was just about
which
to say.
I think can be highly beneficial for even the aging population, particularly for an aging population, because especially if you're not eating a lot of meat, it can help to maintain the muscle energies to be able to perform a lot better. And unless you have significant kidney impairment, there is really no noted harm in taking it, especially in a small dose, a daily dose of say 5 grams of creatine, either monohydrate or creatine hydrochloride. Those will process in your system very well. Other supplements that I consider, and we'll probably have other episodes where we'll talk more intensely about supplementation and things like that. But I like wheat, or not wheat, but a whey protein, casein protein. Those two protein supplements are good, particularly if you're not getting enough meat, because the whey is very quickly and easily absorbed, which is great for right after exercise. Casein is more slow absorbing, can help to kind of refuel the muscles and the tissue through the evening. So it's a good thing to take maybe right before bed, just like a small casein protein shake. Water. Coit mentioned in our interview that he makes a daily habit of 75 milliliters of water, not 75 milliliters, 75 ounces of water per day. That sometimes takes a conscious effort to be able to drink that much. I know my friend John McGuire in his interview also mentioned that that's the only thing he drinks is water. I think water is a very good supplement, hydrating ourselves. Caffeine, if you need a boost, just simply caffeine, not energy drinks per se, because first of all, they're a bit more expensive. They have a bunch of other stuff in them that's rather unproven in terms of the benefits that they can have. But, again, when we're talking about stress, if you're under a significant amount of stress, you might want to consider, is this caffeine that I'm consuming beneficial to me, or is it contributing to my stress and my anxiety? And it may not necessarily be the best thing. So when I talk about caffeine as a supplement, I think of it in terms of performance as a lot of people take pre-workouts to kind of amp themselves up for a workout. I think, if you need an external source to amp you up for your workout, you're probably not motivated enough to work out. Some people are that motivated that they need it just for the really extra push. Those are your much more elite lifters.
I never took pre-workout until I turned 29. And then I was like, I just need a little something, a little extra.
A little jolt of caffeine will do that if you need to, but there's too much other kind of crap in it. And there's, if you're getting a healthy diet, again, you have the nutrients in your body and everything it's really more of a psychological addiction in a way to some of those like pre-workouts for many people. And then, I think carbohydrate can be considered a supplement as well in regards to exercise. But other than that, when you're looking at daily supplementation, there is very little that is highly studied and demonstrated to be effective. So my recommendation for anybody, particularly, we're on most people are on budgets, and you got to be careful in kind of where you spend your money. You're better off spending that money on highly nutritive, nutrient dense, calorically light foods, so that you're getting those nutrients, that supplementation that you need from the food. Because the term supplement just means things that you're not getting that you need, and we should be getting what we need from the foods that we eat.
So you're saying best way to go is more vegetables and fruits, that low calorie, really filling.
Yeah, your low calorie, nutrient dense
Antioxidants,
foods.
okay.
And all of that stuff. There's people that'll take antioxidants.
Handful of blueberries will do the trick.
Right. I mean, the foods that we eat naturally have so many of these healthful benefits.
Well, you mentioned the foods that we eat, right? And I think it could easily be argued that a lot of the foods that we eat are what causes a lot of the stress, right? We live in such a fast-paced, we got to go. You know what? I didn't have time to meal prep. I'm just going to swing by Carl's Jr. and get myself a meal. Well, now I'm getting myself a meal that's pumped with preservatives and sugar, and eventually I'm going to feel good in that moment in time when I'm eating it because it's delicious and tasty. But
well, I would argue
once
that's delicious and tasty. But.
Well, insert whatever fast food. Once that leaves my body and that dopamine crash goes down, or that my insulin levels affect, I'm going to feel sluggish or slow, and I'm not going to feel motivated, or, maybe by me drinking a 32 liters or 32 soda because I got an extra large. Now, me personally, I don't drink soda. I try and stay away from that, but
it's called pop.
Pop, yeah,
Pop.
Midwest boy, saying pop. That sugar level, that sugar spike, that's gotta incorporate with some of the stress that people are feeling as well.
Well, it's not. I don't think it's fueling that. It's affecting the stress response.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, first of all, if you drink a lot of if you drink any sugary pop, other than somebody who is extremely active and in close proximity to workout, that sugar is really just going to mess with your insulin. It's going to mess with your insulin sensitivity, and it's going to contribute to obesity. And obesity is one of the consequences of high stress. It can contribute to the stress, but it's also being, no pun intended, fed by the stress. You mentioned fast food eating. That's the worst thing you can eat, period, whether you're under stress or not under stress. Having high sugary drinks, worst thing we can do. Again, we're probably much better off just drinking pure water. I find that difficult for myself, but I don't really consume a lot of pop or soda, whatever you want to call it. But how we consume our foods through the day are going to contribute to our stress levels. And we have an American diet which is very high in refined sugars and fats. Mm-hmm. And, what do we do in the morning? We get up, we're in a hurry, which, that is our choice, to be in a hurry. So saying that food contributes to the anxiety, the anxiety is contributing to the food, and we're contributing to our own anxiety by not preparing, not taking the time to make the healthier choices. And so if we get up in the morning and our breakfast has to be a highly refined bowl of sugary cereal, that's our choice. That's our problem. It doesn't take much more time to make a more healthy meal. It takes a little bit of time and preparation to meal prep at the beginning of a week and know what we're going to eat and plan what we're going to eat. But if you get up in the morning, you eat the traditional American breakfast, which is, you know, some kind of carbohydrate, whether it's, you know, a bagel, toast, cereal, even oatmeal, even just by itself, isn't necessarily the best. It's a little bit better because it's a more slow absorbing. It has a little bit better, you know, effects on cholesterol and things like that. But that alone is not going to be sufficient to really carry us through the day. You need something with some good protein, reasonable amount of healthy fats, and then healthy, slow absorbing carbohydrates in that meal. And if you eat a healthy breakfast, then you're full, you're satisfied throughout much of the morning. You're not suddenly getting to work having this huge insulin spike because the, you know, those carbs hit you, and then you have the insulin spike, your blood sugar drops dramatically. Now suddenly you're hungry again. And what are we going to go for when we're in a stressful situation? Our blood sugar feels low and we're rushed. We're going to go for convenience. And that's where you either pull into the fast food spot, or you go to the vending machine, or you grab a candy bar out of the, you know, desk drawer or something like that, and you eat more crap. And what's that crap going to do? It's going to spike your insulin. You're going to have another crash, and then you're going to go for junk again. And so, you know, the choices that we make in regards to food dramatically affect our stress and anxiety levels. And it's just simply making better choices and preparing and planning, and we can alleviate a lot of the aspects of stress. You know, if I'm eating well, my body's going to be better prepared to be able to deal with stress, because it's going to have the appropriate amounts of carbohydrates in my system. It's going to have all of the proper chemicals that are needed to make the neurotransmitters and the hormones in my body. And my body is going to respond more positively to the stresses rather than feeding it with crap, stuff that is more pro-inflammatory, creating greater inflammation in our body, which is magnified by the stress. And, you know, so when you look at, you know, the consequences of stress and long-term stress, knowing that, okay, acute stress can promote a response that's going to be adaptive and positive. When we have chronic or long-term stress, it tends to exacerbate some of the medical conditions we have. If we have depression, anxiety, those types of things, that stress is just exacerbating that even further. If we have heart disease, it's going to exacerbate it further. It can contribute to the development of heart disease through higher blood pressure, higher heart rate, higher sympathetic nervous system response rather than a parasympathetic response. It can contribute to heart arrhythmias, or dysrhythmias rather. It can increase the risk of heart attack and stroke. Talked about obesity. You mentioned the effects on the menstrual cycle for females, which that in itself can contribute to even further anxiety because, oh my God, I missed my period, am I pregnant, and those kind of things, when it's really just the stress that it is affecting it. Sexual dysfunction is a big issue for a lot of couples. Can cause hair and skin problems.
We didn't even talk about hair.
Yeah. And then, stomach problems, your gastrointestinal problems and things like that can all come from the stress. So, you go back through those. Well, if I change my diet, change my motivational activities or my relaxation techniques, change my exercise and physical activity habits, we can counteract so many of those even though the stress is still present. And so really when we're looking at affecting stress in a positive manner, or affecting our stress response, it's minimize the stress as best we can. Remove the stressful situations, get out of that stressful, toxic relationship, get off of social media if it's not healthy for you. Change jobs if you're capable of changing jobs, or if you're not capable of it, finding your purpose in that stress or that job that you're dealing with. once we can kind of manage the stress on that side, we're also able to manage our response, our physiological response, by changing our physiological behaviors and psychological behaviors that are going to make us better, more responsive to the stresses that we're under.
Man, I don't have anything to say after that. That was very well said.
All right, so we'll wrap up for today.
Yeah, we'll wrap up. Final thoughts. If you are experiencing stress, just like Dr. Armstrong said, focus on diet, get regular exercise, remove yourself from a stressful situation, and find your purpose. And hopefully this message finds you wherever you are, and keep aging well.
Well, I would add too, if the stress and anxiety is seeming unmanageable, seek help. Find a therapist, find, a friend that's not just going to enable you, but a friend that's going to kind of direct you the way you need to be directed.
And just remember, you got this. Keep breathing, be strong,
and age well. Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.